Revenge with Karen.
Make sure the DPO assignment forms in before Thursday, Rachel murmured to herself, tapping the final checkbox on her encrypted spreadsheet. A moment later, a Slack ping lit up her screen, not a reply to the 3-week-old memo she'd sent about cross-border processing risks. Just Derek, the new VP of Ops, demanding headcounts for a photo op in Amsterdam. Rachel sighed, saving the file to both the secure drive and her local archive, because experience taught her one thing. The people who needed compliance most were usually the first to forget where they filed it. She didn't expect a thank you. That wasn't how things worked at Viron Tech. Rachel had been their shadow systems whisperer for 7 years, long enough to know that the higher you climbed, the less you understood the wiring under the floorboards. Let the C-suite brag about AI-powered synergy pipelines and automated user flow matrices. Meanwhile, be in the server room, finding yet another orphan database nobody labeled and fixing its access controls before it became a headline. She didn't want applause. She wanted functionality. It's just that sometimes those two were mutually exclusive. By the way, if you're the kind of person who enjoys watching quiet competence go nuclear on corporate stupidity, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and like the video. It's free. It helps us more than you think. Hey, 93% of folks forget to do it. Be the 7%. Now, Rachel wasn't bitter. She was seasoned. The kind of season that came from rewriting sloppy subcontractor agreements at 2 a.m. so their French partner wouldn't scream noncompliance and back out of a 7-figure pilot. The kind of season that made her unflappable when Derek swaggered into his first all-hands meeting and declared they'd be optimizing redundancy in legacy roles. He jotted that phrase down, not because she was worried yet, but because men like Derek had a pattern. Buzzwords now, breakdowns later, and Viron Tech was ramping hard into later. The Amsterdam launch was scheduled for next week, some euros 100 million in ad spend, trade partner contracts, and regulatory filings hinged on that day. Rachel had triple-checked every one of the 48 required GDPR filings, and she knew, deep in her bones, that if a single question was asked about Article 30 records, data retention protocols, or the identity of their data protection officer, the entire champagne glass tower would shatter. But no one asked her. Not the CEO, not legal, not Derek, who kept chirping about their data like it was a pet koi pond, and not a compliance disaster waiting to be subpoenaed. Rachel kept her mouth shut. She always did, until it mattered. She was a ghost in the org chart, but not in the filings. Her name was on every privacy impact assessment, every joint controller contract, every vendor risk memo. Her initials were in the audit trail metadata on every form they submitted to the EU regulator. And when the Amsterdam launch finally came, she'd already be on site, not for applause, not for recognition, but because her hotel was booked 6 months ago. Somebody had to make sure the signatures matched the systems. She didn't dress like PR. She didn't pose for launch photos. She packed blackout documents, backup drives, and a USB with 3 air-gap checklists that could shut the whole thing down if someone got cute with personal data. No one invited her to the dry runs, but she was on the guest list anyway. In fact, her signature was the reason the venue's insurance binder had been finalized at all. As she shut her laptop, Rachel smiled, not because she was smug, but because the math didn't lie. They didn't know it yet, but if anyone asked the wrong question, at the wrong time, in the wrong room, they'd remember exactly who she was. She found out she was fired when her calendar emptied itself. No joke, 1 second she was sipping weak hotel coffee in the Amsterdam office kitchenette, waiting on legal to confirm final clearance on the DPO reassignment forms. The next, every meeting on her Outlook vanished like someone had Control+C'd her existence. No call, no hallway whisper, just a digital shrug. Then came the email. Subject, Organizational Alignment, Initiative Role Redundancy Notification Sender, VP Ops at Viron.com, no salutation. No signature. Just 4 paragraphs of sanitized jargon so devoid of humanity it could have been written by the printer toner. Dear team member, began as if the man had forgotten she had a name. As part of our ongoing transformation, your role has been assessed as redundant. Your responsibilities will be transitioned to automated systems and supported by external legal partners moving forward. Automated systems. External partners. Translation. ChatGPT and some overpriced consultancy firm that didn't even know what a records of processing activity was, let alone where Viron text was stored. Spoiler, it was in a locked SharePoint folder labeled Do Not Touch 2021 Final. Guess who created it? Her hands didn't shake. Her jaw didn't clench. What she felt, weirdly, was a kind of amusement. Derek hadn't even bothered to check which system she was still hard-coded into. Half the EU launch documents still routed through her access keys. The other half required two-factor from a device that was, oops, still in her purse. She leaned back in the creaky office chair and stared at the screen, blinking slowly. So this is how we do it now. Ghosted by Outlook, executed by Gmail. It wasn't the firing that stung. It was the insult of it. 7 years of preempting lawsuits and preventing fines, reduced to a bullet point under cost optimization. They couldn't even fake decency long enough to give her a call. And Derek, same guy who once asked her if GDPR was that EU cookie thing, he'd made himself her executioner, through email. Somewhere down the hall, a junior analyst was frantically asking someone if they had the final data transfer impact assessments. Someone else was wondering where the hell the Privacy Shield documentation lived now that the US-EU agreement had changed again. Rachel didn't move, just scrolled down, single line in bold near the bottom. Please return all Viron tech property to the designated offboarding representative by end of day Thursday. She checked the calendar. It was Thursday. 3:42 p.m., the offboarding rep still hadn't shown up. She hadn't even been removed from the system yet. Her badge still beeped at the office doors. Her email still live. No one had shut it off. They'd pulled the trigger, but forgot to chamber the round. Opened her encrypted backup vault, clicked one file, labeled GDPR Risk Matrix Final RR, and dragged it onto a clean USB. Redundant, she looked at the clock. The product launch was in less than 18 hours. Her compliance certification form, signed, timestamped, and fully validated, was required before they could legally demo user data features in the EU. But sure, let the bots handle it. Maybe one of Derek's external partners could figure out what a DPIA was between their airport lounge martinis. Rachel stood up, adjusted her blazer, slid the USB into her pocket. If they were going to play stupid games, they were about to win a very expensive prize. The next morning, Rachel sat in the Amsterdam venue's makeshift war room, sipping from a paper cup of espresso that tasted like burnt bark, and watching the slow-motion train wreck unfold in high definition. Nobody questioned why she was still there. Not legal, not ops, not even Derek, who breezed past her with the confidence of a man who'd read the first paragraph of a Wikipedia article, and now believed himself fluent in international compliance law. Her flight had been booked months ago, bundled under the EU launch delegation. Per diem was auto-approved, her hotel reserved under a corporate code. She was a ghost with credentials, untouchable, unnoticed, and still paid. The payroll system hadn't caught up to Derek's cost-cutting crusade yet, and the irony, she was still receiving HR newsletters about inclusivity and respect in the workplace. So, she stayed. She wore her badge. She attended planning meetings. She plugged into the public terminal and opened draft documents no one else had finished. No one stopped her, because no one knew what she really did. That was the thing about being the quiet one in compliance. If you were doing your job right, your name was never in the room when shit hit the fan. Which, as she glanced at the task board on the whiteboard wall, is about to happen in 3-2. Do we have final clearance to present the user data migration flow for the beta countries? The head of PR asked, mid-panic. Derek blinked. Yeah, I think legal approved that. A voice from legal's corner, we didn't. There's no updated Article 30 record. We asked for it 3 days ago. Rachel, typing quietly in the back, looked up. It's not just the Article 30, also missing the subprocessor disclosures and the cross-border safeguards. That's required before launch. Silence. One intern dropped his quassa. Derek turned around, face already tightening. Rachel, thought your role was handled. She smiled, dry and effortless. So did I. He didn't have time to argue. The event prep was devouring everyone's attention, and Rachel simply faded back into the background again. Like wallpaper, a tripwire nobody noticed, until it wrapped around their ankles. She wandered the venue halls like a tourist with backstage access, watching as consultants shouted about live stream timings, investors fretted over VIP seating, and some poor IT contractor tried to connect a French laptop to the local Dutch Wi-Fi without crying. Meanwhile, the GDPR folder in the shared drive still had Rachel listed as the only editor. The DPO assignment, still unsigned, the updated registry of processing activities, still pending her validation. At one point, a junior analyst tapped her shoulder and whispered, "Hey, sorry, do you know if we need to update the SCCs for the German segment?" Rachel blinked. "Do we need to?" "Yes." "Will anyone do it before the regulator notices?" "Unlikely." The analyst swallowed hard and backed away slowly. He'd just heard a weather forecast for tornado aimed directly at his cubicle. Rachel sat back down and opened her private doc viewer. She pulled up the launch readiness checklist she'd made months ago, highlighted in red, bold, and now perfectly prophetic. Every unchecked box was another potential fine, another compliance violation, another string of zeros in the EU's penalty calculator. And yet, Derek was somewhere upstairs right now, rehearsing talking points about responsible innovation with champagne breath and LinkedIn swagger. She could have warned them, could have stepped in, could have fixed it, but they'd made her redundant. So now, she was just observing, with excellent espresso. Upstairs, under a ceiling of LED lights and illusion, Derek stood at the center of a half-assembled press stage, yelling about synergizing user acquisition pipelines and leveraging behavioral telemetry, which, translated from tech bro to English, meant absolutely nothing. Rachel watched from the back row of the venue's media room, tucked between a stack of unopened lanyards and a banner that still had a typo in the Dutch translation of privacy-first innovation. She'd pointed it out yesterday. No one fixed it. Why start now? PR was spinning itself into cotton candy. The glossy sizzle reel was missing disclosure captions. Press packets listed user data processing in 4 countries that hadn't finalized local regulator sign-off. The firm's EU privacy compliance fact sheet had been hastily copied from a 2-year-old webinar and still referenced the Privacy Shield framework, which had been invalidated since July 2020. But the photos looked great. Derek strutted around in a blazer with the tag still on the sleeve, barking things like, "We need to streamline data flow. Let's eliminate bottlenecks in the consent funnel." Rachel leaned slightly so he wouldn't see her smirk. Consent funnel. The man thought GDPR was a sandwich shop loyalty card. Meanwhile, 1 floor below, legal had gone from mildly annoyed to visibly twitchy. She knew the look. They just realized that despite sending 12 Slack messages and 3 flagged emails, no one had updated the Article 30 records. And Rachel was the only one who had the template. Or rather, the real one, the one that matched the actual data flow, not the one Derek's favorite consultant had whipped up in Figma for optics. A familiar knock. Rachel glanced up to see a junior analyst, Tamaz, she thought, hovering like a guilty meerkat near her folding chair. "Sorry," he whispered, "are we supposed to list the cloud QA vendors in the record of processing activities?" Rachel didn't answer immediately, just took a slow sip of espresso. Then she smiled, warm, tragic, knowing. "Yes," she said, "especially the one Derek added last week without a DPA." His face drained like someone unplugged his blood supply. He gave a strangled thanks and vanished like fog in sunlight. The dominoes were wobbling now. She could feel it, like the pre-rumble before an avalanche. Legal had started asking around for old risk assessments. R was desperately trying to get the regulator's name before the event began. Derek, blissfully unaware, was practicing his opening line in front of the mirror, probably planning to say something like, "Data isn't just the new oil, it's the new air." And through it all, Rachel floated. Untouched. Untouchable. Everywhere she looked, there were gaps, tiny, fatal cracks in the surface that only someone like her would notice. The DPA for the Italian market, never translated. Cookie banner live on the French landing page, not configured for opt-out. The vendor they used for ad personalization, still storing logs in a US data center flagged by the ET. She'd written memos, drafted risk reports, circulated read receipts. They ignored all of them. And now the engine was redlining. No brakes, no map, and Derek behind the wheel, humming to himself as the car sped toward the cliff. Rachel leaned back, exhaled slowly, mistaken her silence for absence. They'd mistaken her precision for passivity. But the thing about dominoes, once they start falling, no one can stop the chain. The launch press conference opened with all the sweaty optimism of a Silicon Valley cult wedding, flashbulbs popping, techno remixes thumping, and Derek pacing the stage like he was about to unveil the cure for death. Rachel stood near the side wall, unnoticed as usual, tucked behind the lighting rig, and a pyramid of swag bags filled with biodegradable pens and QR codes that, ironically, led to a non-compliant tracking page. The CEO, a man whose hair was engineered to withstand hurricanes, took the podium with a grin so wide it looked surgically enhanced. Today, he began, we are not just launching a product. We are launching a promise to the users, to the regulators, and to the world. Flash, applause, flash. Journalists typed on their laptops. Influencers posed. PR was vibrating with secondhand glee. Then, from the third row, a hand rose. Calm, measured. The kind of hand that doesn't wave, it waits. Everyone turned. The man stood. Pinstripe suit, minimalist lanyard, no visible emotion. I have a brief question for the record, he said. Dutch accent, but crisp English. He held up his badge like it was a crucifix. European Data Protection Board. Rachel's fingers stopped mid-scroll on her phone. Derek squinted, confused. The CEO blinked. The man adjusted his tie. Who is your appointed data protection officer for EU operations? Just like that, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. A silence spread like spilled ink. Microphones crackled. The CEO chuckled, an instinct, a default. Oh, we've got all that covered, he said. Our legal team's top-notch. Fully aligned with best practices. Fan of transparency. Derek leaned in, eager to flex. Yeah, it's all automated now, he added with a smirk. Modernized the whole flow. No need for legacy overhead. The regulator didn't blink. So there's no human-appointed DPO? Legal counsel Paul, a man whose entire personality was risk avoidance, slowly rotated his head toward Rachel. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Rachel looked up from her phone. Her expression unreadable. Didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just tilted her head like someone watching a magician who just pulled the pin out of a grenade. Paul swallowed hard. Actually, he said, voice a shade too high, Miss Rachel NG was listed on our filings as DPO for the EU zone. The regulator scribbled something down. And is Miss NG currently employed by Viron Tech? Another pause. Rachel felt the weight of 24 eyes shifting toward her, but she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't need to. Paul stammered, she's still on payroll. The offboarding hasn't been finalized. Derek's smirk evaporated. The CEO glanced sideways. What do you mean she's still on payroll? Paul didn't answer. The regulator nodded once. We'll need to verify documentation. If there is no active DPO, properly designated and available, you understand that constitutes a violation under Article 37 of the GDPR. What's the consequence of that? The CEO asked, trying to sound casual. The regulator offered the thinnest of smiles. Up to 20 million euros, or 4% of your annual global turnover. Click, a journalist's camera shutter. Flash, another photo. Rachel exhaled through her nose. Quiet, controlled, she didn't blink, didn't gloat. Just stood there, still as a switchblade, waiting. The question had been asked, and now the fall would begin. The moment the regulator stepped aside and made a brief call, likely to his office, or worse, the European Data Protection Supervisor's office. The press buzz collapsed like a punctured lung. A sharp ripple of tension tore through the room. Cameras lowered. The DJ, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, slowly faded the music out mid-beat, leaving a sterile silence hanging above the half-lit stage. Pending verification of GDPR compliance, regulator said coolly, we are pausing your demonstration of any feature that includes data processing or user profiling. The CEO's jaw twitched. Derek looked like someone had just asked him to explain the second law of thermodynamics. PR dropped their smiles like hot coals. A reporter raised her hand. Does this affect the full EU product rollout? She asked. The regulator didn't look at her. That depends on the documentation. Rachel, still standing by the wall, watched as Derek spun toward legal with all the grace of a cornered raccoon. What documentation is he talking about? We submitted the filings. Paul, the legal counsel, was sweating in real time. Some, but not the DPO confirmation, and not the revised Article 30 record. And Rachel's name is still on the filings. Derek's voice went up an octave. She's been offboarded. I fired her yesterday. No, Paul said, barely above a whisper. Emailed her. HR hasn't processed the termination. Finance still has her active, so technically he trailed off. Everyone knew what technically meant in regulatory terms. You don't tell a European regulator technically. You hand them signed, time-stamped, notarized proof in triplicate, or you get buried in fines so deep your grandchildren feel the audit. Rachel didn't say a word. She didn't move, just watched the unraveling with the same expression she might reserve for a squirrel trying to hotwire a car. Derek pointed at her like she was a malfunctioning printer. "You don't even work here anymore." Rachel blinked. "I'm still wearing the badge, Derek." Paul cleared his throat. "And she still has access to internal systems. Her credentials are active. Her compliance mailbox is still receiving policy change alerts." "She was the compliance mailbox," muttered a junior from legal. CEO turned beet red. "Can someone fix this?" "Not before the regulator gets what he asked for," Paul said. Rachel tilted her head toward the media crew still watching the circus unfold. "You might want to ask PR to delay the embargoed press release. It mentions cross-border compliance. Pretty sure that's under scrutiny now." Derek looked like he was going to pop a blood vessel. "You're enjoying this." Rachel didn't smile. "No, Derek, I wrote this." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was loaded. Ticking. They couldn't launch. They couldn't demo. They couldn't even legally display user behavior modeling unless someone untangled the regulatory mess, and quickly. And the only person who knew where all the threads were buried, still standing quietly, still technically on payroll, still holding the keys to every risk report, audit trail, vendor contract, and signed DPO assignment form. CEO dropped into a folding chair like someone had cut his puppet strings. "How bad is this going to get?" Paul didn't answer. Rachel could have told him. But instead, she turned and walked out of the press hall without a word. Because now the panic was loud enough to speak for itself. They didn't invite her to the emergency meeting. They summoned her. Paul appeared at her hotel room door at 8:13 a.m., looking like a man who'd slept in a conference room chair and had just realized the fire alarm wasn't a drill. No greeting, no apology, just a breathless, "They're asking for you." Rachel sipped her coffee. Regulator, legal, execs, everyone upstairs, now." She shut her laptop slowly, slid her USB into her coat pocket, and followed him without another word. The conference room was already packed. Derek stood by the window, vibrating with barely concealed panic. The CEO looked like he was trying to astral project out of his own body. The regulator sat calmly at the far end of the table, pen poised over his folder, like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. "Miss NG," he said, eyes unreadable, "we've received conflicting documentation from your company regarding the assignment of a data protection officer and related compliance elements for this product launch. Can you clarify your current employment status and your involvement with the GDPR documentation?" Rachel set her coffee down, reached into her bag, pulled out a neatly printed memo, 5 pages, stapled, annotated, highlighted. "I sent this to legal, operations, and product management 3 weeks ago," she said, placing it flat in front of him. "It outlines the incomplete sections of the Article 30 record, missing vendor disclosures, confirmed subprocessors, and the need for an updated DPO confirmation letter prior to launch." The regulator picked it up. First page, subject, GDPR compliance gaps urgent from Rachel and G. Date, 3 weeks ago to Paul Legal, Derek Ops, Marissa Product, CC. Compliance archive. He reads silently for nearly a minute. No one breathed. "This is thorough," he said, and time-stamped. "It's also digitally signed," Rachel added. "The acknowledgement receipts from all recipients." Paul closed his eyes. "She's not lying. I remember this memo." We marked it for review. You flagged it as low priority," Rachel said, and Derek responded with a thumbs-up emoji and the phrase, "looks fine." Derek lurched forward. "That was before we decided to streamline." The regulator held up a hand. "Miss NG," he said, "were you removed from your role before or after this documentation was submitted?" "After," she replied, "by email. No legal offboarding, no HR clearance, still active in systems, no signed revocation of DPO authority." The CEO looked like he might throw up. The regulator nodded once. "That would suggest you were, and perhaps still are, the active data protection officer on record, which means your documentation stands as the last official compliance assessment filed by Viron Tech." Rachel tapped her USB stick on the table. "Also have a mirrored copy of the internal compliance log, including all unreviewed tasks flagged as critical risk. It's synced to the EU audit checklist and has cross-referenced gaps. The last update was made," she glanced at her watch, 11 days ago, "by me." Derek spoke again, weaker now. "We assumed external counsel would." "You assumed wrong," Rachel said, her voice a glacier. "You replaced oversight with automation and hoped no one would ask the right questions." Regulator turned to the CEO. "We'll be initiating a formal inquiry." Please prepare for potential holding action on your EU operations pending the audit's outcome. Miss NG, you may be asked to assist further. Rachel nodded, of course. She didn't gloat, didn't posture. She let the paper do it for her. The regulator slid the memo back into his folder like it was an evidence bag. And Derek looked down at the floor like maybe there was a trapdoor to crawl into. There wasn't. Rachel reached for her coffee again, perfectly calm, and took a slow sip. Turns out, silence hits hardest when it's backed by a paper trail. The phrase preliminary investigation was spoken with the kind of hushed reverence usually reserved for plane crashes and indictments. The EU regulator returned later that afternoon, his time flanked by 2 additional colleagues and a branded satchel that screamed official business. No more questions, no more performance art, just badges, binders, and the slow, surgical peeling back of Viron Tech's false confidence. The first order of business: immediate suspension of all personalized data features across the EU product line. Second, submission of every single compliance document from the past 12 months, signed by a currently employed and officially recognized DPO, which, according to their own system, was still Rachel. Legal tried to triage it. Paul nearly lost his voice, rattling off terms like interim designation and procedural ambiguity, but it was like tossing pool noodles at a wildfire. Every defense unraveled under the simplest of follow-ups. Where is the offboarding form? Who signed the DPO revocation? Where is the updated record of processing activities? And each time, the answer returned to the same embarrassing point of origin: Derek's little redundancy optimization initiative. Rachel wasn't just wrongly offboarded. She was illegally offboarded. By noon, the meeting room had become a courtroom without a gavel. Legal had stopped looking at Derek. PR was gone entirely. The CEO stood at the window, chewing a nail like it owed him money. Paul, now pale as drywall, turned to Rachel and spoke the words like they might trigger a bomb. Rachel, we need to formally rescind your termination. Effective immediately. You are, mission critical, and there was clearly a failure in process. Rachel arched a brow. Negligent process failure, she corrected softly. That's the legal term, especially when the negligence was willful. Derek tried to speak, tried to muster one last gasp of executive deflection, but it came out half-cooked. He thought the tools would cover. No, Rachel cut in, ice-level calm. You thought cost-cutting was more important than regulatory law. You replaced oversight with software and expected the EU to clap. You thought being clever made you safe. It doesn't, it just makes you liable. The CEO finally turned. We'll reinstate your role, retroactively, with full benefits and back pay. Rachel nodded, then leaned forward. And I want more than reinstatement. Paul hesitated, meaning, I want direct authority over all global compliance workflows. No more rerouting through Derek. No more consultants drafting legal language. I want departmental budget control, hiring privileges, and sign-off power on all public-facing documentation related to data governance. Retroactive from the date of my termination email, or I walk. The room held its breath. She wasn't asking. She was offering terms. Paul looked to the CEO. The CEO looked to the regulator. The regulator just shrugged, silently confirming what they all knew: if she walked now, they'd burn. A euros 20 million fine would be the start. Follow-up investigations could stall their EU expansion by a year or more. Investor confidence would crater. And Rachel, she had all the receipts, all the logs, all the quiet memos they ignored. The CEO nodded stiffly. Agreed. You'll have full control. Derek, now visibly sweating through his overpriced shirt, looked like he might faint. Rachel stood up, slid her chair in, and straightened her blazer like she'd just finished a light lunch. Good, she said. Then let's begin. Because if they wanted the company saved, they were going to have to let the ghost of their own negligence run the place. And this time, she wasn't doing it in silence. 3 days later, they put her on stage. It wasn't meant to be a public spectacle or of a damage control exercise wrapped in optics. But by the time the new press conference rolled around, word had leaked. Not about the fine yet, but about the pause, the delay, the regulator's visit, the compliance irregularity. Everyone knew something had gone sideways. Now they were here to watch it get righted. The lights were softer this time. The music was gone. No sizzle reel, no influencer zone. Just a backdrop reading a renewed commitment to trust. Someone in PR must have wrestled with that wording for hours. The CEO stepped up first, same steel wool hair, but less Botox smile, more courtroom humility. "We made a mistake," he said, voice slower, measured. "Not just in process, but in judgment. Today, we're proud to announce that Rachel NG has been formally reinstated as our data protection officer, and effective immediately, will serve as Viron Tech's new head of global compliance." Applause scattered like rain on a tin roof, awkward, delayed, unsure if it was allowed. Rachel stepped forward. No fanfare. No PR intro, no dramatic stinger. Just her, calm, immaculately dressed in her usual muted tones. USB in one pocket, regulator contacts in the other. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just took her place behind the podium like she belonged there because she did. She always had. Derek wasn't there. He'd been transitioned out. The internal memo, which came with a curious lack of celebration. No goodbye cupcakes. No farewell Slack thread. Just a calendar block marked exit interview and a revoked badge scan. Someone said he left the building muttering about AI not needing gatekeepers. Irony writes better punchlines than any comedy writer could. Back in the press room, a journalist raised her hand, eyes sharp behind cat-eye glasses. "Miss NG," she asked, "how does it feel to be back?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "I was never gone," she said, then paused, tilted her head just enough to let the room catch up. Just archived, laughter, not mocking, relieved, real. Even the CEO exhaled like someone who'd just been released from a hostage situation. Rachel scanned the room. PR was quiet. Legal looked like they'd aged 10 years in a week. The junior analysts gave her small, grateful nods from the back row. And the regulator, he was there too, half hidden behind a column, arms crossed, not smiling, but no longer frowning either. Rachel adjusted the mic. "This isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about process, about memory, and about accountability. Compliance is not a cost center. It's not a checkbox. It's the spine of the company, and it deserves a voice." That line ended up in half a dozen headlines. The rest of the day moved in slow waves, interviews, document signings, a quiet handshake from legal that came with a whispered thank you. Rachel didn't gloat, didn't bask. She just went back to work. There were audits to prepare, processes to rebuild, trust to reconstruct. But this time, she wasn't in the background. She was on the org chart, the press release, the payroll, and every decision that mattered. Not redundant, not replaceable, essential, and officially unarchived. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.